Prince Harry's admissions in his memoir Spare that he took drugs is not proof that he took drugs. At least that's what a lawyer argued for the US government yesterday when resisting demands for the release of Prince Harry's visa and immigration documents. You'll recall that the Heritage Foundation made an application to the court for the release of these documents on public interest grounds that, assuming everything he put in his book Spare is true, that either A, he included all of the details about illicit substance use in that application, in which case ordinarily a visa would be denied, or B, he didn't include those documents and then released this book, and therefore something else should be triggered after that, i.e. they should be taking another look at his visa status if he's not included those details in the application. Some might call that lying, but there's a reason it might not be lying, which is the purpose of this video, because the lawyer said that they argued that he embellished the details in the book in order to sell the books. So that made me curious as to whether this book was listed under fact or fiction, because that would obviously make a difference, right? It's either fact or fiction. But given that it was marketed and sold as memoirs, as his story, one would infer that it is all true, save for some inaccuracies, which some people have pointed out. For example, his whereabouts when the Queen Mother, his great-grandmother, died. He wrote that he was at school when in fact he was on holiday skiing. That was obviously not a deliberate mistake or dishonesty. It was just wrongly recalled. But when we look at where this book is listed, this is where it gets interesting. Because in Waterstones, one of the UK's leading bookstores, lists it as obviously true story and memoirs and royal memoirs, whereas Amazon, interestingly enough, lists it as literary fiction. So is it fact or fiction? But when we look at the synopsis, it says, for the first time, Prince Harry tells his own story, chronicling his journey with raw, unflinching honesty. Landmark publication, it's an insight, revelation, etc. So is this pure embellishment, or is all of this true? Because there's a lot of it. I'm not going to read out verbatim huge chunks because I don't want copyright complaints. If you can be interested enough, you can look at it yourself. But if we look at, say, for example, chapter 17, in fact, the last line of chapter 17 says, this is talking about smoking and things like that, says, still like a robot, I took every cig offered me, and in the same automatic, unthinking way, I soon graduated to weed. Is that embellishment, or is it just part of a story, or is it true? But there are many other references. Another one talking about bad behavior, talking about wasting his time at Eton. He made a pact with his schoolmates. This is in chapter 32. And they promised each other they would quit cold turkey. And yet it said the very next night, lying in bed, his mates went to the hall and they started smoking again, as in drugs, not just ordinary cigarettes. If we look at chapter 36, he's talking about being questioned about the possibility of a photograph of him doing cocaine. He was asked, could there be a photo out there? Is it possible that someone might have a photo of you doing cocaine? He was asked. There's a whole dialogue, which is in quite some detail. And then he says, of course, I had been doing cocaine around this time. At someone's country house during a shooting weekend, I'd been offered a line, and I'd done a few more since. It wasn't much fun, and it didn't make me particularly happy, as it seemed to make everyone else around me, but it did make me feel different. And that was my main goal, to feel different. So again, very specific references and a lot of detail. Now, if you were in court trying to find the truth of a story, you would look at how much detail of a story comes out, how coherent it is, whether it changes when questioned and when pressed as to the detail. If someone changes their account and it changes, then it's less credible and so on. Of course, we don't have that here. That's what we do in cross-examination, but we don't have that here. We just have this book, which has been ghost-written. So although all the detail has been put down, it's been then ghost-written, and doubtless checked, etc., etc. But one way or another, all of these details remained in the book. If we look at chapter 44, he's talking about drinking a lot of beer, gallons of beer, he said. He said, I believe that was also the night I smoked an entire shopping bag of weed. I don't recommend it. Then again, it might have been another night. Hard to be precise when it comes to a shopping bag full of weed. So again, is that embellishment? It's arguable that it could be embellishment. He even says it might be another night. It's hard to be precise. So did that happen or did it not? Did it happen on a different night? He said it might have happened on a different night, but either way, he said it happened. So either way, if it did happen, those details ought to have been on that visa application. Again, in chapter 87, talking about mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and there are several more references about this. So again, they're either all true or they're all fiction. And so with Amazon listing it under fiction, others listing it under true memoirs, it's hard to know which. Either way, it has over 84,000 reviews on Amazon and it still maintains a 4-star rating. Although when you dig into those reviews, 9% gave it a 1-star, 11% at the 3-star, and then the majority of 60% rated it a 5-star book. So let me know in the comments, have you read this? What do you think? What would you rate this book as? Did you buy it? Did you read it? Did you rate it? And what do you think about the lawyer's claims that some of these might just be embellishments to sell the book? If that does turn out to be the case, does that change your view on the book? Does it change your view about Harry? Does it change your views about the visa application and his status in the United States? Now, some might say, just leave it all behind. Some might say that because of who he is, he should have some special treatment. A lot of you might say that it doesn't matter who he is, he shouldn't have any special treatment regardless. And some of you might believe wholeheartedly that these are just pure embellishments and those bits were not true. But in which case, why would they be in the book? So there's a lot of questions here, at least that's what the lawyer for the US government was arguing yesterday. Now, it's important to remember here that Harry himself is not on trial. His visa is not on trial. He is not a defendant. There's no suggestion or allegations that he has lied or anything like that. The only thing at stake here is for the judge to rule whether or not these documents should be made public. Now, according to the lawyers, the Department of Homeland Security will argue that Harry did not sign any authorization to release these records and that the court cannot order them to do so. The Heritage Foundation would have obviously argued that Harry waived those protections when he spoke openly, as it is described in his book, an open, unflinching honesty in his book, and therefore they would have argued that the contents of the application are no longer private. I'm not quite sure that it extends that far, in my personal view, because a visa application is still inherently private, regardless of publishing a book and talking about your life stories. They are ultimately separate things, although I do think the decision for this one is on a bit of a knife edge. If I were pressed for a guess, I would say that the court will probably rule that the department does not have to disclose these documents. They will probably, in my view, uphold the privacy aspect, because otherwise it's got the potential to open floodgates. Because if the court orders these documents to be made public, then there's a whole list of other people against whom it could be argued their documents should also be made public. And on balance, I don't think the court is likely to open up those floodgates. It's just my thoughts at this stage. I don't think the court's going to rule that, but obviously we'll wait and see. Now, obviously in the book, Harry has written about drug use, but he didn't write about his visa application. So obviously if he had written what he put in that application, that might be akin to waiving privilege in that application, but he didn't do that. He's written about drug use, which was either completely true or it's been embellished, or again, it might just be inaccurate. And furthermore, the mere risk that there might be inaccuracies in the book, whether it's based on a true story or not, the mere fact that there may be inaccuracies within the book, and it wasn't written with the intention of it being used as an argument to make his visa application documents public. And again, on reflection, I think it's unlikely that the court will use the book to sanction the publication of these documents. But if the court were to order that these documents are to be made public, then there's no good outcome, really. Either Prince Harry did note drug taking on his application, in which case it indicates that he's been given special treatment in that he was granted the visa, or he didn't include it, and that is in direct contradiction to the contents of his book, which is either confirmation that his book is a work of fiction, or, if you were to be less charitable, it would show a lie in that he didn't include details which, if he were truthful in his book, contradicts the truth. So there's no good outcome here. Either he did include those details, he was granted a visa, which will give rise to severe criticism, or he didn't include those details, and then there's a direct conflict with his memoir Spare, if indeed that's true, which, as I said at the outset of this video, which in one technical argument you could say is right. It's just something he wrote in a book, and he could easily say that it's been embellished, which if the documents are published and it doesn't include those details, that is something I could be fairly sure he'll come out to say, that the book was embellished, it's not really true, and therefore there was no need to include it on the visa application. All very messy and no straightforward outcome. The only straightforward outcome, which is the one that I think will happen, is that they will deny the release of these documents, and that will be that. A lot of people will be disappointed to not know what was in those documents, and they'll remain sealed. But let me know what you think. Do you think the documents should be published and do you have a right to know what's in them? If you're in the States, he's living in your country. Do you think a prince of another country coming into your country should have their documents made public? Or do you think they're inherently private? I know a lot of people should think they're private. I'm usually on the side of keeping things private unless you're doing it in public and therefore there's no expectation of privacy. I've talked about that in many videos before. If there's no reasonable expectation of privacy, then people should be able to know about it. But if you cross a threshold and the circumstances dictate that there really ought to be the quality and the necessary expectation of privacy in those circumstances, then it should be private. And I think that's probably the case, whoever you are and wherever you are, I think that's probably the case for visa application documents. So those are just my thoughts. I thought that was a very interesting twist of argument yesterday by the lawyers, and we'll wait to see whether it's successful or not. But in the meantime, if you do enjoy this content, please do like the video, make sure you subscribe. We're here on Black Belt Secrets for my real thoughts. So thank you for subscribing, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.